It's easy to do this to the left because the cities are the product of their ideas. And so you can see the homelessness, the devastation, the defecation. But you can't do that with a Republican city. That must be very embarrassing to you as a Democrat. How humiliated are you right now?
So this Republican is not ready for what is about to come next.
I'm actually feeling pretty good because I have a city to talk about, and a city in Ron DeSantis' home state,
Okay.
a city called Jacksonville. Could also refer to it as the murder capital. Could also refer to it as a place where there was a Republican mayor until Donna Deegan, just about a month and a half ago, was able to turn that seat to a Democrat TV personality who is now the mayor. Same thing as what happened in Colorado Springs, Colorado, flipping a long-held Republican seat. Ron DeSantis helps himself in doing this, obviously. This is for his supporters or potential supporters. But he ignores the fact that Florida has the third highest homeless population in the country, behind California, which also has a population double the size of Florida, and behind New York.
Well, if you look at that, it turns out Republican policies are terrible. Now, one of the reasons why Republicans always say, look at Democratic cities, is because, and I know this is wild, most cities are Democratic cities because most people are not voting for Republicans and actually despise the Republican Party. As it turns out, the only reason why Republicans are electorally relevant at a national level is because an extreme amount of gerrymandering. And any community that has a decent amount of people that are interacting with each other on a regular basis, turns out that they tend to lean more towards the left. So there are very few Republican cities to point to, but the few Republican cities that they are pretty bad.
And we live here. We know that there are a lot of homeless people here. But he has the number 3 highest homeless population. He's not talking about that. He's not talking about the homicide rate in a city like Jacksonville and what his plan is to fix his home state. He's only pointing fingers at what's going on in, quote, liberal states. So we'll see. I hope Donna Deegan can turn things around in Jacksonville. But these Republicans, when we look at what they're doing as Democrats, we say, there are things that you need to get your house in order about. And we talked about Bakersfield as well, where Kevin McCarthy is from. Complete Republican control and much more dangerous than a Chicago or a New York.
So this point is very excellent, and it is something that the Republicans do all the time, which is to say, anytime Republicans are failing at something, they just point to Democrats failing at something and say that that's a bigger deal. But the thing is, Republicans tend to be far worse in these instances. Some of the poorest states are red states. Some of the states that have the highest homicide rates are red states. Some of the states that have the highest percent of people that are homeless are red states. And you can go on and on with all of these different issues that tend to be worse in red states. It's just that more people have heard of New York City than Biloxi, Mississippi. And so people have fresh images in their mind of homelessness in California or New York, but not necessarily those same images for places like the middle of nowhere. And that's something that Republicans heavily lean on, because they of course can't lean on their actual policies. Because admittedly, Democratic policies don't go anywhere near far enough. Fundamentally, there aren't cities using things like eminent domain to establish public housing. There are plenty of cities with Democratic mayors, like Minneapolis for example, that has properties that have literally been abandoned by landlords that could easily be taken by the city with eminent domain and turned into public housing. But of course, the Democrats are not willing to do all of that socialist type stuff. So the Democrats put in place these half measures when it comes to like homeless shelters and small little programs that maybe help a few people, but ultimately over-police their behavior. But the Republicans don't even do that. The Republican policy is basically to just let people die in the streets, and even worse, actively make their lives more miserable by using the police office, by effectively criminalizing homelessness, and just claiming that the problem of homelessness is actually some sort of crime problem, and using that to justify putting even more money into police budgets. Police that then, of course, go and brutalize marginalized people. And so in this sense, this is one of those things where Republicans will lean on a critique of Democrats that is halfway true. Democrats literally are not doing enough to deal with homelessness across the country because they are unwilling to challenge the real estate lobby. But Republicans aren't actually willing to challenge the real estate lobby either. What Republicans are promising is to use violent force from the state in order to make it so that privileged people from the suburbs don't have to see homeless people. And that really is the heart of their argument, isn't it? That Republicans' complaint about homelessness is not that people are without home. It is that privileged, wealthy individuals might see a homeless person. That is their primary frustration. And it really speaks to the extreme selfishness and evil at the heart of the Republican Party. The Democratic Party pretends to do a lot to help, but fundamentally fails because they're unwilling to challenge the financial interest behind the real estate industry, and thus as a result aren't willing to do basic things like a housing first policy. But one of these two things is obviously far worse than the other. And for Republicans to pretend that their states and cities don't have to deal with homelessness is really just to lean entirely on the fact that most Americans are entirely ignorant about what homelessness actually looks like across the country. And that fundamentally is why this Republican was so unprepared to deal with the reality of homelessness in Jacksonville, Florida. And that fundamentally is why this Republican was so incapable of dealing with the reality of homelessness in Florida. Because when you compare red states and blue states to each other, one of them tends to be a heck of a lot worse than the other. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that we should be satisfied with the half-baked policies that the Democrats are pushing. Because by no measure are Democratic policies on housing enough. And until we have a housing policy that is centered around getting people housing first, no matter what, right away, and then figuring out what other resources they need to be helped, will we actually deal with the problem of homelessness. Because without guaranteed housing, there will be homelessness. And unfortunately at this point, that's not something the Democrats are willing to support. And just because the Republicans are worse doesn't mean we should be satisfied with what we have currently from the Democrats.